Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer provided Michiganders with some welcome news on Monday when she lifted the state's stay-at-home order, one of the longest in the country, allowing bars and restaurants to reopen at 50% capacity. Beginning next Monday, June 8th. Chad Livengood is the senior editor of policy, politics, and Detroit Rising for Detroit Crain's Business. He joined me this week to provide some insight on what the governor's decision means for the state, its people, and its economy as Michigan gears up to get back to work. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. We began our conversation by re-encapsulating where the state has been and where they're poised to go now that the restrictions have been eased.
Well, this has been a gradual process of slowly reopening parts of the economy in a way that basically seeks to not allow people just to immediately rush out and go back to work because the virus is still in our community, in various communities across the state. And the governor was trying to take this dial approach rather than flipping the switch. She wanted to turn the dial. So we have been slowly turning the dial for the last month, essentially. It started with opening up the construction industry in early May and the real estate industry. And then a couple of weeks later, she allowed manufacturing companies, which are 20% of our workforce in Michigan, to reopen. And then in northern Michigan at Memorial Day weekend, the governor authorized restaurants and bars and retailers to reopen to foot traffic and dine-in patrons with various restrictions, 50% occupancy limits, and in the case of retailers, people have to be wearing masks inside. And then last week, she allowed downstate retailers to open up just for appointment only. So we had various different classes of retailers. We had the essential retailers like grocery stores, supermarkets, and convenience stores that sell food and other items that sustain life. And then we had the big box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot. They remained open throughout the entire pandemic. But now we have the small retailers, the boutique shops. My parents live in outside of Ann Arbor. They own a fireplace store. So they reopened by appointment only last week. And then starting Thursday, they'll be able to reopen for regular foot traffic. So it has been a very incremental and gradual process. And we still don't have a lot of other businesses that won't open. For example, just personal care like nails, hair, barbers, they cannot reopen yet and probably will not be allowed to reopen until the 4th of July.
And can you tell me about the atmosphere at the press conference to reopen the state yesterday? Because I know a lot of people have been waiting for this day to come.
Yeah, well, this is a press conference that they're not open to the entire press. We've been doing because of social distancing and concerns about about spreading the virus. These press conferences in Michigan have been limited to a pool of a couple of reporters who go in and ask questions on behalf of the Michigan press corps as a whole. But yeah, you definitely saw this has been building for a while. I wrote a column last week basically saying that most people were kind of over this stay-at-home order because they kind of started going about doing things. Even though the governor remains popular and her decision-making has a majority of approval of voters in Michigan, a lot of people had kind of gotten ahead of the governor as far as going about trying to do things in a safe manner without but basically just sort of blowing off the stay-at-home order here in the last several weeks. I mean, we saw it last Memorial Day weekend up north when the governor allows the bars and restaurants reopen. The hotels kind of decided, hey, we're going to be open for business, and we're going to let and we're not going to turn people away from downstate, and that's exactly what happened. You had hotels that were sold out over Memorial Day weekend, even though the governor specifically said in the order, in-state travel is prohibited. So a lot of that has now been totally eased, and this is just natural in Michigan. We are the state that invented mobility by putting the world on wheels, and so we have in our DNA here in Michigan. Our inclination is to get in the car and drive north, and that's kind of what you're starting to see in the last several weeks as people were starting to kind of move on from the executive order.
And what do you think is the biggest economic challenge that the state will have to overcome as a result of the virus?
Well, step back to February. We had a 20-year low in unemployment in February, and now here in June we have the highest unemployment rate in that's ever been recorded in Michigan history, higher than the Great Depression. Now, some of those folks are unemployed because their businesses are shut down. My neighbor is a beautician, so her cosmetology hair salon is shut down, and she won't go back to work until until the governor allows her to, essentially. So she'll remain on unemployment. And what the key here is also going to be is how much does that unemployment number go down as the service sector comes back online. That was the first to shut down the restaurants, the bars. The governor shut them down the day before St. Patrick's Day, and everybody's been on unemployment ever since. The key question is, will those jobs all come back? And I mean, it's already clear a lot of restaurants in Michigan are not going to reopen, and we're not going to have the same robust economy we had in February. It may be a long struggle to rebuild that service sector, the hospitality industry that has been decimated and devastated by this shutdown. And then it's just a matter of, in Michigan, we sell cars. We build, we make, we design, and sell cars. And so how do automobile sales rebound? That will be a key thing we'll be watching. In the last 3 or 4 years, U.S. domestic output of sales of automobiles has been 17 million. At the depths of the Great Recession, it was like around 11 million. So, I mean, if we do not see some rebound in sales, that's going to have a major detrimental effect on the economy of Michigan, particularly in Southeast Michigan.
According to Forbes, more than 1/3, 36% of the American economy is made up of gig workers. That equates to 57 million people. Under the $2 trillion CARES Act that Congress passed in order to assist laid off, furloughed, or gig workers who were previously excluded, it offered them an extra $600 a month for up to 4 months and extended their state unemployment benefits for up to 13 weeks, as long as they could prove they were out of work because of the virus. However, Livengood says it may be some time before that segment of our economy recovers?
This is a real head scratcher of a question. I'm not totally sure, but I'll give you an example. I mean, you can't hardly find an Uber in the middle of the day right now, or Lyft car. The drivers have essentially disappeared in many ways, either because they were able to file for unemployment and get that $600 a week pandemic benefit, that really they'd have to do a lot of driving in order to earn $600 a week, as a Uber driver. And the other problem is people's fear of the virus, either both the passenger contracting it in a vehicle that's not theirs, that they don't know how often it's been cleaned or how it was cleaned or whether it was even cleaned at all, and then you have the fear of the driver of contracting it from people. So I think this is a real big unanswered question going forward, is whether rideshare services in the gig economy rebound, other types of gig economy jobs, in the service sector. They're inevitably going to rebound, but that's going to also depend on people's disposable income, like anything else. But the rideshare public transportation aspect of it is really kind of an unknown. We may, very well see a rebound in traditional taxi services.
And as the state reopens and gets back to business, can you just tell me your thoughts on how different you think society will look once the state gets back in mass?
Yeah, I mean, we are going to be going back to work with mask on, and we are going to be a lot more conscious of germs than we ever were before. That's certainly a major change. And I think we're also more mindful of workplace conditions in general. I have not seen the kind, I've never seen this kind of robust response from the business community about the working conditions of employees. You have just not seen as much conscious effort put into making workplaces safe as you've seen in the last several weeks and months rather. That's in part because they want to be back in business, but also because their employees are demanding it. They are demanding that there be safety protocols and cleaning that may not have existed before. I walked into a bar last week in Escanaba, Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, and it smelled and felt cleaner than some hospitals I've been in. I mean, it was unbelievable how disinfected that little bar was. But it kind of spoke to me that definitely things, standards for cleanliness and sanitation have definitely improved in workplaces.
And I've got two more for you. The first is, can you talk to me about how the governor has been perceived? I know that she's had quarrels with the state Republican leader. So, but the majority of the people in the state still have her with a high approval rating. So I'm just wondering if you could give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, she definitely is her approval rating is somewhere in around 60, which is pretty good for a governor in any type of circumstances. But given the magnitude of problems, I mean, I cannot think of a time in Michigan history where a governor faced a global pandemic, a 500-year flood in Midland, Michigan, that wiped out half of a town, a state budget deficit that's $6 billion over the next 18 months, civil unrest for a couple of days. Hopefully, we've gotten past that, but certainly racial strife is definitely a major issue right now in the society, and so the governor has been handling all of this. Any one of these issues would have been just plateful for any governor. So this governor is her approval rating remains high, even with all this going on, even with a lot of second guessing, including from journalists like myself about how she's re-engaging the economy and moving forward in the pandemic. And at the same time, the President of the United States, I mean, his approval ratings in the mid 40s in Michigan. So she's pulling quite above, quite a bit above him, and he's the one on the ballot this fall, not her. At least at this juncture, she's obviously still being talked about for vice president, for being Joe Biden's running mate. But at this moment, Donald Trump is the one on the ballot, and Gretchen Whitmer is getting all the plaudits.
Do you think that the governor will be selected as the running mate, or no, for Joe Biden?
You know, I kind of got out of the predictions business in 2016 when everyone said there's no way
Donald Trump could win.
Donald Trump could win the presidency. So I don't know. I mean, she's certainly got the qualifications. She certainly has the stature nationally now because of this crisis, and because of her push to get the Trump administration to have a better, more robust response to this pandemic, particularly when it comes to medical supplies and the ability to sort of fight this virus. She's got all the tools, and she certainly has the tenacity. I think it's just going to come down to whether Joe Biden finds that to be the right mix, or if he thinks he needs to have a different balance in his ticket.
And my final question for you has to do with what lessons do you think we learned as a state through this crisis? How we can improve to be better moving forward?
You know, as I sort of reflect on this a little bit, I think we've learned, one, the importance of our healthcare system, that having a strong healthcare system with a lot of capacity to handle unexpected medical emergencies is really important. And I think we're going to have some examination of that going forward. We clearly were not ready as a state, as a nation, for this pandemic. I mean, we had hospitals in Metro Detroit in late March, early April that had a couple of days supplies of masks and other PPE at any given moment. And that is really frightening, really, to think about, that you could have had hospitals that were nearly overrun, not just by capacity, but also by their medical supplies in order for nurses and doctors to be protected when they were dealing with patients with this highly contagious virus. And so I think there's going to be a major look back and maybe some major changes in public policy as it relates to healthcare in this country and state, in order to be more prepared, have better stockpiles of medical supplies that we clearly were lacking in late March. And I think that also the interesting lesson in Michigan, our manufacturing base that had experience making different types of products, we used our know-how to pivot into making personal protection equipment. So we had just an example, we had a fuel cell company in Ann Arbor that had a lot of chemical engineers standing around, not doing much during the lockdown. They pivoted into making masks and gowns and plastic shields and such. We had numerous companies like that I think the interesting thing to go watch going forward is whether they actually continue to work in that space in the medical supplies industry, and sort of ended up reinventing themselves essentially during the pandemic. That's going to be important, not just for preparing for the next pandemic or epidemic, but also for diversifying our economy and not being reliant on China to make masks to supply both our frontline first responders and our people in general who are going about doing their business every day.
Hey, Chad, I want to thank you for taking a few minutes to join us to recap the reopening of Michigan. I want to thank you for your time and have a great day today, okay?
Hey, thanks for having me, Kevin. I really appreciate it.